Sophie Sullivan woke with a start, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The house stood silent, save for the gentle hum of the heating system pushing warm air through the vents of their Boston suburb mansion. Something had pulled her from sleep, a voice perhaps. She slipped from beneath her quilted comforter, feet finding the plush carpet as she tiptoed to her bedroom door. The hallway stretched before her, bathed in shadows broken only by the ambient glow from the staircase nightlight. Sophie pressed herself against the wall, inching toward the master suite, where hushed voices filtered through the crack beneath the door. Her father should have been asleep hours ago. He had an early flight to Seattle in the morning. Then she heard it, Victoria's voice, low and secretive, speaking into her phone. Tomorrow is when he disappears forever. The break line is already prepared. A pause, then a soft laugh that sent chills down Sophie's spine. $5 million in life insurance, the house, everything. Just be patient a little longer. Sophie's blood turned to ice. She knew instantly who Victoria was talking about. Not some abstract business rival or anonymous target, her father. Robert Sullivan, the man Victoria had married just months ago, the man who had welcomed her into their lives, who had given her everything. Sophie backed away, careful not to make a sound. Her legs trembled as she retreated to her room, closing the door with agonizing slowness before slumping against it. Her mind raced. How could a 9-year-old girl convince her father that his new wife planned to kill him? Morning arrived with cruel brightness, sunlight streaming through the bay windows of the Sullivan family kitchen. Robert Sullivan, tall and distinguished with salt and pepper hair that complemented his tailored suit, checked his watch as he sipped his coffee. At 45, he commanded the respect of everyone in the Boston tech scene. As CEO of Sullivan Innovations, he had transformed a struggling startup into a billion-dollar company that specialized in cybersecurity software. The business magazines called him brilliant. His competitors called him ruthless. His employees called him demanding but fair. What no one called him anymore was a family man. Sophie watched him from the kitchen island, her school uniform already perfectly pressed, her backpack packed and ready. She had been awake since 5, rehearsing what to say, how to warn him. "Big meeting today," she asked, her voice fighting to remain casual as she pushed her scrambled eggs around the plate. Robert nodded without looking up from his tablet. "Potential acquisition in Seattle. Could double our market share in the Pacific Northwest." He scrolled through emails, his attention divided as always. "I'll be back tomorrow night. Mrs. Peterson will check on you, and Victoria will be home by 7. Sophie set down her fork. "Dad, do you think... Could you maybe check your car before you leave? The brakes specifically?" This made him look up, eyebrows drawn together. "The brakes? Why would I do that?" The words caught in her throat. "Because your wife is trying to kill you," sounded insane even in her head. "Just a feeling. Better safe than sorry, right?" Robert's expression softened momentarily, a rare glimpse of the father he had once been. "The car was just serviced last week, sweetheart. Everything's fine." Before Sophie could try again, Victoria glided into the kitchen, a vision in cream cashmere and pearls. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves around her shoulders, her makeup immaculate despite the early hour. "Good morning, family." She kissed Robert's cheek, then turned to Sophie with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Ready for your history test today, Sophie?" Sophie nodded stiffly. Victoria remembered everything: test dates, appointments, preferences, and wielded this information like weapons disguised as thoughtfulness. "I made you a protein shake for the road," Victoria told Robert, producing a travel mug with practiced efficiency. "You barely touched your dinner last night, and you'll need your energy for the negotiations." Robert accepted the mug gratefully. "What would I do without you?" Sophie watched in silent horror as her father gulped down the contents, wondering if this too contained something sinister. But poisoning seemed too obvious for Victoria. No, the brake line made more sense, a tragic accident on the highway far from prying eyes. "Dad," Sophie blurted, desperation overtaking caution. "Could I talk to you alone before you leave? It's important." Robert checked his watch again. "Can it wait, honey? My flight." "It can't wait." The force in Sophie's voice surprised even her. Victoria's perfect smile faltered for just a moment. "Robert, you really can't miss that flight. The board is expecting you." Sophie held her father's gaze. "Please, Dad, 5 minutes." Something in her expression must have reached him. Robert nodded. 5 minutes. Let's go to my study." As they left, Sophie caught Victoria's ice-cold stare following them out of the kitchen. Robert Sullivan's study reflected the man himself, elegant, organized with everything in its proper place. Dark mahogany shelves lined with business books and family photos, most from before Rachel died 3 years ago. Sophie noticed how the newer photos featured Victoria prominently, while those with Rachel had been relegated to the higher shelves out of immediate sight. "What's this about, Sophie?" Robert settled into his leather chair, checking his Rolex, the timepiece Rachel had given him on their 10th anniversary. Sophie took a deep breath. "Dad, I think Victoria is planning to hurt you." His expression shifted from concern to confusion. "Hurt me? What are you talking about?" "Last night I heard her on the phone. She was talking about your brakes failing today, about collecting insurance money." Sophie's words tumbled out in a desperate rush. "She said tomorrow he disappears forever. She was talking about you, Dad." Robert stared at his daughter, his face unreadable. "Sophie, that's a very serious accusation." "I know what I heard." Tears pricked at her eyes. "Please just check your car before you drive it. Please." Robert leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Honey, I know the past few years have been difficult. Losing your mother, then me remarrying Victoria. This isn't about that." Sophie's voice broke. "Mom taught me to trust my instincts. She said if something feels wrong, it probably is. And everything about Victoria feels wrong." Something flickered in Robert's eyes, a memory perhaps of Rachel saying those exact words. He had loved Sophie's mother deeply, the kind of love that comes once in a lifetime. When cancer took Rachel, it had taken a piece of him too. "All right," he exhaled heavily. "I'll have the car checked." Relief washed over Sophie. "Now, before you leave." "Yes, now." He stood up, straightening his tie. "We'll go to the garage together." The three-car garage housed Robert's collection of luxury vehicles. Today he had planned to take the sleek black Audi sedan for the drive to the airport. Sophie hung back as her father popped the hood and inspected the engine compartment, not entirely sure what he was looking for. "Everything looks normal," he said after a moment, closing the hood. Sophie's heart sank. "Can you check underneath the brake lines?" Robert hesitated, then nodded. He grabbed a flashlight from the workbench and lay down on the cold concrete sliding beneath the vehicle. For almost a minute there was silence. Then Sophie heard a sharp intake of breath. "Dad!" Robert emerged from beneath the car, his face ashen. In his hand he held his phone with the flashlight app illuminating a photo he had just taken. The image showed a clean partial cut through a tube that Sophie assumed was the brake line. "You were right." His voice had transformed, cold and hard as granite. "The brake line has been tampered with. It would have failed once I hit highway speeds." Sophie felt no triumph in being right, only a nauseating wave of fear and validation. "We need to call the police," Robert said, already dialing. "Wait." Sophie grabbed his arm. "If we call the police now, Victoria might talk her way out of it. They'll need more evidence." Robert stared at his daughter, struck by her reasoning. "How do you know that?" "TV shows," Sophie admitted. "But it's true, isn't it? It would be her word against mine, and I'm just a kid." Robert lowered his phone, conflicted. "What are you suggesting?" "I had a dream last night," Sophie said quietly. "About Mom. She told me the only way to make Victoria show her true face is to take everything away first. She said," Sophie hesitated, knowing how strange it would sound. "She said you need to pretend to be dead." In another life, in another moment, Robert might have laughed at such a suggestion. Instead, he looked back at the house where his wife of 6 months was preparing to kill him, then down at his daughter who had just saved his life. "Let me call someone I trust," he said finally. Jack Donovan had been Robert's roommate at Harvard before choosing a badge over the boardroom. Now chief of detectives for Boston PD, Donovan arrived at the Sullivan home within 30 minutes, parking his unmarked sedan down the street. Robert met him in the guest house at the back of the property, bringing Sophie with him. Victoria believed they were saying goodbye before Robert left for the airport. Donovan was tall and solidly built, with watchful blue eyes that missed nothing. He listened silently as Robert explained the situation, then examined the photos of the brake line. "This was no amateur job," Donovan confirmed, zooming in on the image. "Clean partial cut designed to fail under stress but look like normal wear and tear." "Victoria did this," Sophie insisted. "I heard her planning it." Donovan regarded the 9-year-old thoughtfully. "You understand how serious these accusations are, Sophie?" "Yes, sir. She wants to kill my dad for his money." Donovan turned to Robert. And you believe her? The break line speaks for itself, Robert replied. And Sophie has never lied to me. Not about anything important. Donovan paced the guest house thinking, even with the tampered break line, it's not enough to arrest Victoria. We need more concrete evidence connecting her to the sabotage. What about my idea, Sophie asked, about Dad pretending to be dead? Donovan stopped pacing. That's what you're proposing, faking your death. Robert nodded. If Victoria believes I'm dead, she might reveal more, talk to accomplices, access accounts, show her true motives. It's extremely risky, Donovan warned, and technically outside proper procedure. Jack, she tried to kill me, Robert said quietly. She's living in my house with my daughter. I need to know how deep this goes before I confront her. Donovan rubbed his chin, considering. I have contacts who could help stage an accident. Traffic cameras could be managed. We'd need a controlled environment, minimal witnesses. Sophie watched the detective's resistance crumbling. You've done this before, haven't you? Donovan's eyes narrowed at her perceptiveness. Once. Witness protection situation. But this is different. This is much more public. You're not exactly a low-profile citizen, Robert. Can it be done? Yes, Donovan admitted. But there would be consequences. People you care about would believe you're dead. Your sister Olivia, your colleagues' friends. The grief would be real. Robert looked at Sophie. Could you handle that? Pretending I'm gone, staying with Victoria, knowing what she did. Sophie straightened her shoulders. I can do it, Dad. For you. Donovan shook his head in amazement. 9 years old with more courage than most adults I know. He turned serious again. Before we go further down this road, I want to know more about Victoria. Her background, previous relationships, financials. I did a standard background check before we married, Robert admitted. Nothing unusual came up. Let me dig deeper. Donovan pulled out his phone. What's her maiden name? Williams. Victoria Williams from Chicago. Donovan made the call, stepping outside to speak privately with someone from his department. Left alone with her father, Sophie felt the weight of what they were considering. Are you scared? She asked. Robert knelt to her level, his hands on her shoulders. Terrified. Not of dying, of leaving you. I've already been a part-time father at best since your mother died. I buried myself in work rather than face the pain. You did your best, Sophie said, the child comforting the parent. No, I didn't, but I'm going to do better now. He pulled her into a tight hug. You are extraordinarily brave, Sophie Sullivan. Just like your mother. Donovan returned, his expression grim. Victoria Williams doesn't exist, at least not the one you married. My team found multiple identities, Rebecca Warren, Cindy Porter, and her likely real name, Vanessa Mitchell. Robert stood stunned. What? There's more. Her previous husband died in a car accident 2 years ago, brake failure on a mountain road. He had recently increased his life insurance policy to $3 million. Vanessa Mitchell collected as his sole beneficiary, then disappeared. Sophie felt a chill run through her. She's done this before. The local police suspected foul play, but couldn't prove it. Donovan continued. And I've got a name, Jason Miller. He has a record for fraud and mechanical experience. Phone records show regular contact with Victoria's second phone. Second phone, Robert echoed. The one she keeps in her yoga bag, Sophie said quietly. I've seen her using it when she thinks no one's around. Robert's face hardened. So she has a partner. Most likely her lover, Donovan confirmed. This appears to be their pattern. Victoria marries wealthy men. Jason helps stage the accident. They collect the insurance and disappear until the heat dies down. Robert paced the room, processing this betrayal. All this time, I thought she loved me. She loved what you represented, Donovan said. Money, status, security. How do we proceed? Robert asked, his voice hollow. Donovan outlined the plan. They would stage an accident on Highway 95, a remote stretch with minimal traffic. Robert would drive his car to the location, then switch to an unmarked police vehicle. The Audi would be pushed over an embankment with controlled explosives to simulate a crash. Robert's wedding ring, partially melted, would be found in the wreckage. The medical examiner is a friend, Donovan explained. He'll confirm identification through dental records we'll falsify. You'll stay in a safe house until we gather enough evidence to arrest Victoria and Jason. How long? Robert asked. Days, possibly weeks. The longer Victoria believes she's gotten away with it, the more likely she'll make mistakes. Robert turned to his daughter. Sophie shouldn't be involved any further. She can stay with Olivia. No, Sophie interrupted. Victoria would be suspicious if I didn't come home after the funeral. I need to be there to see what she does, what she says. Absolutely not, Robert said firmly. It's too dangerous. We'll have the house under surveillance, Donovan assured him. Hidden cameras, microphones. Nothing will happen to Sophie. You can't guarantee that. Dad, Sophie said quietly. Mom always said I could see things others missed. I noticed Victoria when you couldn't. I need to do this. Robert looked tormented. Sophie, you're 9 years old. Your job is to be a child, not to risk your life catching a murderer. I stopped being just a child when Mom died, Sophie replied with heartbreaking maturity. Please let me help. I'll be careful, I promise. The three of them debated for another hour. Finally, Robert relented with strict conditions. Sophie would stay with Olivia initially, then return to the house only after the funeral. She would carry a special phone provided by Donovan programmed with a panic button that would bring immediate help. If at any point you feel threatened, Robert insisted, you press that button. No hesitation. Sophie nodded solemnly. When do we start? Today, Donovan said. Right now, Robert needs to leave for his business trip as planned. My team will set up the accident site. By this afternoon, Victoria will receive the news that her husband died in a tragic car crash. Robert looked at his watch, the same Rolex Rachel had given him now, about to become part of his false identity. I should say goodbye to Victoria, keep everything seeming normal. Be convincing, Donovan warned. If she suspects anything, the whole operation falls apart. Robert nodded grimly. I've been in enough corporate negotiations to know how to hide my true feelings. As they prepared to leave the guest house, Sophie suddenly wrapped her arms around her father's waist. Dad, I'm scared. Robert knelt, holding her tight. So am I, sweetheart. But we're going to get through this together. I promise you, I will come back. Mom said you would, Sophie whispered. In my dream, she promised you'd come back if we did this right. Robert kissed her forehead, blinking back tears. Then we'll do it right. Victoria stood in the kitchen arranging fresh-cut flowers when Robert and Sophie returned to the main house. Her smile was radiant, showing no sign that she had just attempted to engineer her husband's death. There you are. Your car service will be here any minute, Robert. She approached, straightening his already perfect tie. What were you two conspiring about in the guest house? Just some father-daughter time, Robert replied smoothly. I promised to bring Sophie back a souvenir from Seattle. How sweet. Victoria's fingers lingered on his chest. I'll miss you, darling. The house feels empty without you. Robert forced himself to kiss her way, fighting the revulsion that threatened to overwhelm him. It's just one night. I'll be home tomorrow evening. Victoria turned to Sophie. Why don't you get your backpack? Sweetheart, the bus will be here soon. Once Sophie had left the kitchen, Victoria's demeanor subtly shifted. Her smile remained, but her eyes cooled several degrees. She's been acting strange this morning. Is everything all right? Just missing her dad, Robert said casually. You know how she gets before I travel. Victoria nodded, not entirely convinced. Well, have a safe trip. Call me when you land. Of course, Robert picked up his briefcase. The weight of it, nothing compared to the knowledge he now carried. Take care of Sophie while I'm gone. Always, Victoria promised, her eyes gleaming with what Robert now recognized as calculation rather than affection. Sophie returned with her backpack, and Robert embraced her one last time. He whispered in her ear, Remember, I'm coming back. No matter what happens, I'm coming back. Sophie nodded against his shoulder, clinging to him a moment longer than usual. When she pulled away, her face was composed, giving nothing away. Robert walked to his car, feeling Victoria's eyes on him from the kitchen window. He placed his luggage in the trunk, then slid behind the wheel of the death trap she had prepared for him. The engine started smoothly. The brake line wouldn't fail until he hit the highway, applied pressure at high speed. He backed out of the driveway, raising his hand in a final wave to his wife. Sophie stood on the porch, small and vulnerable, yet somehow the strongest person in this terrible triangle. 2 hours later, Robert stood on a deserted stretch of Highway 95, watching as Donovan's team prepared the staged accident. The Audi was positioned at the edge of a steep embankment, smoke canisters and remote-controlled explosives carefully placed to create the illusion of a catastrophic crash. Your wedding ring, Donovan reminded him, extending his hand. Robert twisted the platinum band from his finger, not the one Rachel had given him, but the new one Victoria had insisted upon for their wedding. What about my actual body? Won't they look for remains? The fire will be intense enough to explain the absence of recognizable remains, Donovan explained. The medical examiner will confirm your identity through the personal effects and falsified dental records. By the time anyone might question it, we'll have Victoria in custody. Robert placed the ring on the dashboard where it would be found partially melted in the wreckage. He took one last look at his car, the luxury vehicle that had become a murder weapon, and felt a strange detachment. It was just a thing after all. What mattered was Sophie, her safety, her future. It's time, Donovan said, checking his watch. My officer will call in the accident in exactly 30 minutes. By then, we'll be halfway to the safe house. As they drove away, Robert watched in the side mirror as his old life went up in flames, literally as the controlled explosion sent a fireball into the clear morning sky. Black smoke billowed upward, visible for miles. Within hours, news would spread that Robert Sullivan, tech innovator and CEO, had died in a tragic accident. His thoughts turned to Sophie sitting in her fourth-grade classroom, unaware that the plan was now in motion. Soon the principal would call her to the office. Olivia would be waiting there, devastated, to tell her that her father was gone. And Sophie would have to pretend to believe it. In her classroom at Boston Preparatory Academy, Sophie stared at the history test before her, unable to focus on questions about the American Revolution. Her mind kept returning to her father, to the plan they had set in motion, to Victoria's cold eyes watching him drive away. The classroom door opened. Principal Wagner stood there, his face solemn. Sophie, could you come with me, please? Bring your things. Her classmates watched curiously as Sophie gathered her belongings, her hands steady despite the storm inside her. This was it, the news had come. In the principal's office, Aunt Olivia waited, her face streaked with tears. The moment Sophie entered, Olivia pulled her into a crushing embrace. Oh, Sophie, she sobbed. There's been an accident. Your dad. Sophie let her body go limp with shock, her mind racing through what Donovan had coached her to say. What happened to Dad? Principal Wagner placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Your father's car went off the road this morning. The police called your aunt. I'm so very sorry, Sophie. No. Sophie whispered, genuine tears filling her eyes, not for her father, who she knew was safe, but for Olivia, whose grief was real and raw. That can't be right. He just left this morning. He was going to Seattle. Olivia's voice broke as she explained. There was a fire, honey. The car, they said the brakes failed on the highway. Sophie let the tears come, then creating the illusion of devastating grief, while her mind focused on one thought: Victoria had done this. Victoria had tried to kill her father and believed she had succeeded. Does Victoria know? Sophie asked. Olivia nodded. The police called her first. She's at home waiting for us. Home, where the woman who had just attempted to murder her there was waiting, believing she had won. Sophie would have to face her, to look into the eyes of a killer and pretend she didn't know the truth. I want to go home, Sophie said, her voice small. I want to see Victoria. Olivia wiped her tears, surprised by the request. Are you sure you can stay with me as long as you need? I need to go home, Sophie insisted. Please, Aunt Olivia. As they drove through the leafy suburbs toward the Sullivan mansion, Sophie gazed out the window at a world that looked unchanged despite everything that had happened. People walked their dogs, joggers passed by, mail carriers delivered packages. Normal life continuing while her world had been turned inside out. Olivia reached across to squeeze her hand. You're being incredibly brave, Sophie. Your dad would be proud. Sophie squeezed back, wishing she could tell her aunt the truth, spare her this unnecessary pain. Dad always said I was strong like Mom. You are, Olivia's voice caught. Rachel was the strongest person I knew, and she raised a daughter just like her. They pulled into the circular driveway of the Sullivan home. Victoria stood on the front steps, dressed in black, her face a mask of perfect grief. When she saw Sophie, she rushed forward, arms outstretched. Sophie, oh my darling girl, she cried, enveloping the child in a perfumed embrace. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Sophie stood rigid in Victoria's arms, fighting the urge to push her away. Instead, she made her body tremble with false sobs, hiding her face against Victoria's shoulder, while her mind cataloged every detail of this performance. He can't be gone, Sophie murmured. He promised he'd come back. Victoria stroked her hair. I know, sweetheart. It doesn't seem real. Over Sophie's head, Victoria and Olivia exchanged looks, grief meeting suspicion. Olivia had never fully warmed to her brother's new wife, sensing something beneath the polished surface that didn't quite ring true. The police said it was the brakes, Olivia said, watching Victoria closely. They failed on the highway. Such a terrible accident, Victoria agreed, her voice catching expertly. If only he'd had the car checked more regularly. Sophie felt a chill at these words, the subtle shifting of blame, the careful construction of a narrative where Robert's death was unfortunate, but somewhat his own fault. As they moved inside the house, Sophie noticed small changes already. Robert's jacket was no longer on the coat rack. His laptop was missing from the sideboard where he always left it. Victoria had wasted no time beginning to erase him. In the living room, Victoria sat between Sophie and Olivia, holding their hands in a tableau of shared grief. We need to support each other now, she said softly. We're family, all we have left of Robert. Olivia withdrew her hand. The police will want to investigate the car. Standard procedure for accidents like this. A flicker of something concerned fear crossed Victoria's face before her mask of sorrow returned. Of course, whatever they need to do. Sophie watched this exchange with new awareness. Her father had been right to trust Olivia's instincts. Her aunt sensed something wrong even without knowing the truth. I should call the family attorney, Victoria said, rising gracefully. There will be arrangements to make papers to file. As Victoria stepped into Robert's study, closing the door behind her, Olivia turned to Sophie. How are you really doing, honey? Sophie chose her words carefully. I keep thinking about what Dad would want me to do now, how he'd want me to be strong. Olivia studied her niece with concern. You don't have to be strong all the time, Sophie. It's okay to fall apart. It's okay to cry and scream and be angry. I know. Sophie glanced toward the study where Victoria was making her calls. But not yet. Not right now. In the safe house across town, Robert watched the hidden camera feed from his study. Victoria sat at his desk making calls on her second phone, the one Sophie had mentioned. Her face showed no trace of the grieving widow she had portrayed minutes earlier. Instead, she looked focused, triumphant, even as she spoke in a low voice. It's done, she said to the person on the other end. Exactly as planned. The brakes failed on the highway. Yes, he's really gone. The police confirmed it. I don't have the insurance money yet, but it's just a matter of time. 5 million, Jason. 5 million in this house and everything else. Robert's hands clenched into fists as he listened to Victoria discuss his death with her lover, planning their future together with his money. Beside him, Donovan recorded everything, building their case piece by piece. The stepdaughter, Victoria continued, her voice hardening. She's with Olivia now, but I'll need to keep her close at least until the will is settled. Can't have people thinking I'm not taking care of Robert's precious child. She laughed, then a cold sound that bore no resemblance to the warm laughter she had shared with Robert during their courtship. Don't worry. Once everything's transferred, we'll find a boarding school far away. Switzerland, perhaps. Somewhere she can't interfere. Robert felt sick listening to this woman, this stranger coolly plotting to send his daughter away. He thought of all the moments he had shared with Victoria, the intimacy and trust he had given her, all while she had been planning his death. How soon can you get here? Victoria was asking. Not yet. Too suspicious. Give it a week, after the funeral. Speaking of which, I need to call the funeral home, arrange something suitably extravagant. The grieving widow sparing no expense. She ended the call and sat for a moment, allowing herself a small, satisfied smile, before composing her features back into an expression of sorrow and returning to the living room. She's good, Donovan murmured. Very good. But we've got her now. Robert barely heard him, his eyes fixed on the screen, where Sophie sat stiffly beside Olivia, enduring Victoria's false comfort. His 9-year-old daughter carrying a burden no child should bear, facing a woman who had tried to kill her father and now planned to ship her off to another continent. This ends now, Robert growled. I've seen enough. Arrest her. Donovan shook his head. Not yet. We need more concrete evidence connecting her to the tampering proof of her relationship with Jason. Right now, she could still claim innocence. She just confessed on camera to being glad you're dead and planning to spend your money, Donovan corrected. Not to killing you. Defense attorneys would tear that apart in court. Robert ran his hands through his hair in frustration. So Sophie continues to live with a murderer while we gather more evidence. How is that acceptable? Sophie will stay with Olivia tonight, Donovan assured him. Victoria won't object so soon after the accident. It gives us time to install more surveillance equipment and build our case. Robert looked back at the screen, where Sophie now sat alone, Victoria having gone to make funeral arrangements. His daughter looked small in the large living room, but her posture remained straight, her eyes alert and watchful. She's so much like her mother, Robert whispered. Rachel would be proud of her courage and ashamed of how blind I've been. We all have blind spots when it comes to the people we love, Donovan said quietly. You're not the first to be deceived by someone like Victoria. But Sophie saw through her from the beginning. A child saw what I couldn't. Children often see more clearly than adults, Donovan agreed. They haven't learned to ignore their instincts yet. Robert touched the screen where Sophie's image sat motionless. Hold on, sweetheart, he murmured. Just a little longer. Dad's coming home soon. The Sullivan mansion felt like a mausoleum in the days following Robert's death. Black wreaths adorned the front doors. Flower arrangements from business associates, friends, and neighbors crowded every surface in the foyer. Blinds remained half-drawn, casting the rooms in perpetual twilight. The house that had once radiated warmth during Rachel's lifetime now felt cold and hollow, a stage set for Victoria's performance as the grieving widow. Sophie watched it all unfold from a careful distance, splitting her time between Olivia's townhouse and reluctant visits to what had been her home. Each time she entered the mansion, her skin prickled with awareness that she was stepping into the domain of the woman who had tried to murder her father. 3 days after the accident, Sophie sat in Olivia's kitchen picking at a plate of scrambled eggs. The local news played quietly on a tablet propped against the toaster. A reporter stood in front of Sullivan Innovations headquarters, delivering the latest update on the tech mogul's sudden death. The business world continues to reel from the loss of Robert Sullivan, whose funeral is scheduled for tomorrow at St. Thomas Episcopal Church. Sullivan Innovations stock has fallen 12% since the announcement of the CEO's death in a tragic car accident earlier this week. Sources close to the board of directors indicate that VP of Operations Caroline Westfield will likely assume interim leadership of the company. Olivia switched off the tablet with a sigh. You don't need to hear all that right now. Sophie nodded absently, her mind elsewhere. She wondered where her father was at this moment, if he was watching the same news reports from his safe house, seeing his own obituary displayed beneath his corporate headshot. Did you sleep any better last night? Olivia asked, her voice gentle. A little. In truth, Sophie had barely slept since the plan began. She spent nights staring at the ceiling of Olivia's guest room, rehearsing what to see and how to act, preparing for her inevitable return to Victoria's custody. Olivia reached across the table, covering Sophie's small hand with her own. You know you can stay here as long as you want. Victoria's called twice about having you come home, but I told her you need more time. Sophie looked up sharply. What did she say? She insisted she's your legal guardian now. Olivia's expression darkened. Said it would be better for your healing process to be in familiar surroundings. I told her familiar surroundings include your aunt's house. Sophie felt a rush of gratitude. Olivia had always been a steady presence in her life, first as Rachel's closest friend, then as Robert's supportive sister, through his grief, and now as Sophie's protector. Victoria doesn't like you very much, Sophie observed. A small, wry smile crossed Olivia's face. The feeling is entirely mutual. Her expression softened. Your dad called me the night before the accident. Sophie's heart skipped. He did. What did he say? It was strange. He seemed concerned, asked me to promise that if anything ever happened to him, I'd look after you. Olivia's eyes grew distant with memory. When I asked what brought this on, he laughed it off, said he was being paranoid after reading about another CEO's sudden death. Sophie kept her expression neutral, though her mind raced. Her father had been preparing, creating a safety net for her even before they knew for certain about Victoria's plot. I've been thinking, Olivia continued cautiously, about your dad's will. He revised it after marrying Victoria, but he told me he made special provisions for you, a trust Victoria can't touch. I should call Andrew Phillips, your dad's attorney, to make sure those provisions are being honored. Victoria's already talked to him, Sophie said, remembering the hushed phone conversation she'd overheard. She had him come to the house yesterday. Olivia's brow furrowed. That seems premature with the funeral not even held yet. She said it was to get things in order. That's what she tells everyone. The doorbell rang, interrupting their conversation. Sophie tensed instinctively, knowing who it would be even before Olivia returned to the kitchen with Victoria in tow. Victoria wore a tailored black dress that managed to be both appropriate for mourning and subtly flattering. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a modest chignon, her makeup minimal, but expertly applied to enhance her image of dignified grief. "Sophie, darling," she said, arms outstretched, "I've missed you so much." Sophie allowed herself to be embraced, keeping her body rigid. Victoria smelled of expensive perfume and something else, anticipation perhaps. The scent of someone barely containing their triumph. "I've come to bring you home," Victoria continued, smoothing Sophie's hair. "The house is too quiet without you, and we should be together at a time like this, don't you think?" "Sophie has been resting well here," Olivia interjected, positioning herself subtly between them. "The funeral's tomorrow. Perhaps after that." "I'm her legal guardian," Victoria said firmly, the gentle facade slipping just slightly. "While I appreciate everything you've done, Olivia, Sophie belongs at home with me. Robert would have wanted that." Sophie watched the tension build between the two women. She knew what Detective Donovan wanted for her to return to the mansion, where hidden cameras and microphones had been installed to observe Victoria's behavior up close. But the thought of sleeping under the same roof as Victoria made her stomach churn. "I'll go," Sophie said quietly. Both women turned to her in surprise. "Sophie, you don't have to," Olivia started. "It's okay," Sophie assured her, meeting her aunt's concerned gaze. I think Dad would want me to go home." Victoria's smile held the satisfaction of victory. "Wonderful. I've already put your things in the car. We can stop for ice cream on the way if you'd like." The offer, so normal, so motherly, felt obscene coming from the woman who had orchestrated her father's death. Still, Sophie nodded dutifully and went to gather her backpack. In the bedroom, she quickly checked the special phone Donovan had given her, making sure it was securely hidden in her sock drawer. The device was programmed with a single button that would bring immediate help if pressed. Olivia followed her into the room, closing the door behind them. "Are you sure about this?" "You can say no." "I'm sure." Sophie zipped her backpack with determined fingers. "Victoria won't hurt me, not yet. She needs people to see her taking care of me." Olivia studied her niece, troubled by her reasoning. "You sound so grown up sometimes." "It worries me." Sophie managed a small smile. "Mom always said I had an old soul. Rachel would be proud of how brave you're being." Olivia pulled her into a tight hug. "Call me anytime, day or night, I mean it. And I'll see you tomorrow at the service, the funeral, the ceremony where Sophie would have to stand beside her father's empty casket and pretend to say goodbye to a man who was actually watching from a distance, gathering evidence against the woman who had tried to kill him." The drive home with Victoria was filled with one-sided conversation. Victoria spoke of funeral arrangements, of the lovely tribute Robert's company had published, of the outpouring of support from the community. Sophie stared out the window, offering only minimal responses. As they pulled into the mansion's driveway, Victoria reached over to squeeze Sophie's hand. "I know this is hard, sweetheart, but we'll get through it together, you and me." Sophie looked at their joined hands, her small one enveloped by Victoria's manicured fingers, and thought of those same hands tampering with her father's brake line, coolly ensuring his death. "Yes," Sophie said softly, "together." The mansion's interior had been transformed. Photos of Robert now adorned every surface, many featuring Victoria at his side, her head resting on his shoulder or her arms around his waist. A shrine to their perfect marriage. Sophie noticed that several of the photos had been digitally altered images where she had stood between them, now cropped to show only the happy couple. "I've kept your father's study exactly as he left it," Victoria said, leading Sophie through the house. "I thought that might comfort you, having a place where you can feel close to him." She opened the study door with theatrical solemnity. Robert's desk remained untouched, his leather chair pushed back slightly as if he had just stepped away for a moment. But Sophie noticed subtle differences. His personal laptop was missing, and the drawer where he kept important documents stood slightly ajar. "Thank you," Sophie murmured, recognizing the manipulation but playing her part. "Can I have some time alone here to feel close to Dad?" Victoria's face softened with practiced compassion. Of course, darling. I'll be in the kitchen making calls about tomorrow. Take all the time you need. When the door closed, Sophie immediately began exploring the room, looking for evidence of Victoria's activities. She knew cameras had been installed. Donovan had explained the surveillance system to her, but she couldn't spot them. They were watching, though. Her father was watching. She checked the desk drawers, finding them mostly empty. The filing cabinet in the corner had been cleaned out as well. Victoria had wasted no time removing important papers. On the desk calendar, Sophie noticed a meeting scheduled for next week had been circled in red. SI board meeting, CEO succession vote. Victoria had clearly been studying Robert's schedule, anticipating the business fallout from his death. The desk phone rang, startling her. Sophie hesitated, then answered. Robert Sullivan's office. There was a pause, then a male voice she didn't recognize. Is Victoria available? She's making calls in the kitchen. Who's calling, please? Another pause. Jason Miller. I'm an insurance investigator handling Mr. Sullivan's case. Sophie's pulse quickened. Jason Miller, Victoria's accomplice and lover. The man her father and Donovan had identified as the mechanic who likely helped sabotage the brake line. I can tell her you called, Sophie offered, keeping her voice steady. No need, Jason replied quickly. I'll try her cell phone instead. The line went dead. Soon. Sophie replaced the receiver with trembling fingers. She had just spoken to the second person responsible for the attempt on her father's life. The reality of the conspiracy suddenly felt more tangible, more terrifying. She slipped out of the study and moved quietly toward the kitchen, where Victoria's voice drifted into the hallway. No, not yet, Victoria was saying in hushed tones. It's too soon. The funeral is tomorrow. Yes, I know you're impatient. So am I, but appearances matter right now. The insurance company sent an investigator to look at the wreckage. Standard procedure, that's what they said, but we need to be careful. Sophie pressed herself against the wall, listening intently. The brake line was cut perfectly, Victoria continued. It would have looked like normal wear and tear. There's no way they can prove otherwise. No, I haven't accessed the accounts yet. The attorney says everything transfers automatically, but there's paperwork. The stepdaughter, she's home now. Olivia was being difficult, but I insisted. Don't worry about her. She's just a child grieving her father. No threat to us. Sophie's hands clenched into fists at the casual dismissal. If only Victoria knew that the no-threat child had already unraveled her entire plan. I should go, Victoria said. Call me after the funeral, not before. I love you too. Sophie retreated silently to the study, closing the door just as Victoria's footsteps approached. Her heart hammered in her chest. In the safe house across town, she knew her father had heard every word of that conversation, adding it to their growing pile of evidence. At the safe house, Robert Sullivan paced the sparsely furnished living room, his face tight with suppressed rage. On the monitor, he had just watched Sophie discover the empty desk, heard the phone call with Jason Miller, witnessed her careful eavesdropping on Victoria's conversation. She's removing evidence, he said to Donovan, who sat monitoring the feeds. Papers, financial records, everything that might show her planning. We expected that, Donovan replied. That's why we made copies of everything important before this started. Robert ran a hand through his hair, disheveled from days of confinement. She's already talking about accessing my accounts. And did you hear how she dismissed Sophie? Just a child, no threat to us. As if Sophie is merely an inconvenience to be dealt with later. We're building a solid case, Donovan assured him. Mom, the conversations with Jason, the admissions about the brake line, it's all being recorded. It's not enough, Robert insisted. They're being careful. They haven't explicitly stated they tried to kill me. Just that they're glad I'm dead and eager to spend my money. Donovan nodded thoughtfully. We need to apply pressure. Make them nervous enough to make mistakes. How's the insurance investigator angle? We'll have one of my officers pose as an investigator at the funeral tomorrow. Approach Victoria with concerns about the accident. Plant the seed that something looks suspicious. Robert watched the monitor where Sophie now sat at his desk, fingers tracing the leather blotter where his hands had rested countless times. His daughter looked small and vulnerable, yet her composure remained remarkable. Is she safe there? He asked quietly. Really safe. We have officers watching the house 24/7, Donovan reminded him. Every room is monitored except the bathrooms. Sophie has the panic button. If Victoria or Jason make any threatening move, we'll be there in 2 minutes. 2 minutes could be too long. Robert, Donovan's voice was firm. I know this is hell for you, but Sophie is handling herself brilliantly and she's providing us with invaluable intelligence. Without her, we'd have a much weaker case. Robert nodded reluctantly. She's just so young to bear this burden. Some people are forged stronger than others, Donovan said, glancing at the screen where Sophie sat straight-backed and watchful. Your daughter is exceptional, like her mother was, I imagine. Exactly like Rachel. Robert's voice softened with memory. Rachel could always see through people's masks. She would have spotted Victoria's deception immediately. Sophie certainly inherited that gift. Donovan checked his watch. The funeral is at 11 tomorrow. We'll have plainclothes officers positioned throughout the church. I'll attend as myself, old friend of the family, paying respects. Our fake investigator will approach Victoria afterward. And I stay here watching my own funeral on camera. Robert's voice held bitter irony. Just a little longer, Donovan promised. After the funeral, Victoria will feel more secure. That's when people in her position typically get careless. On the monitor, Victoria entered the study with a tray of tea and cookies, the perfect stepmother tending to her grieving child. Robert watched Sophie accept the offering with polite detachment, playing her role flawlessly while hiding her knowledge of the treachery surrounding her. My brave girl, he whispered to the screen. Hold on just a little longer. The morning of the funeral dawned clear and crisp, the kind of perfect autumn day that seemed to mock the somber occasion. Sophie stood in her bedroom, staring at the black dress Olivia had purchased for her. She had no appropriate funeral attire at 9 years old. She had only attended one funeral before her mother's, and she had outgrown those clothes years ago. Victoria knocked softly before entering, already dressed in an elegant black suit with a subtle strand of pearls. Rachel's pearls, Sophie realized with a jolt of anger. Victoria had found them in Robert's bedside drawer, where he had kept them since Rachel's death. Need help with your hair, sweetheart? Victoria offered, picking up a brush from the dresser. Sophie shook her head. I can do it. You look so grown up in your dress. Victoria straightened an invisible wrinkle from the fabric. Your father would be proud of how brave you're being. The casual invocation of her father's pride made Sophie's stomach clench. She bit back the words she longed to hurl at this woman, that she knew nothing of what would make her father proud, that she had no right to speak of him at all. Instead, she asked quietly, Will there be many people at the funeral? Hundreds, Victoria confirmed. Your father was very respected. Business associates, friends, even the governor's office is sending a representative. All those people, Sophie thought, gathering to mourn a man who wasn't actually dead. Hundreds of genuine tears shed while the true criminals stood front and center accepting condolences. The cars will be here in 30 minutes, Victoria continued. Olivia is riding with us. Sophie nodded, relieved that her aunt would be by her side. She waited until Victoria left before reaching under her mattress for the special phone Donovan had given her. No new messages. She tucked it into the small purse Olivia had included with the funeral outfit, ensuring it was within easy reach. Downstairs, the doorbell announced Olivia's arrival. Sophie found her aunt in the foyer dressed in simple black, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. The sight renewed Sophie's guilt about the deception. Olivia's grief was genuine, her pain real. One day, Sophie promised herself they would explain everything and beg forgiveness for the necessary lie. The ride to St. Thomas Episcopal Church passed in tense silence. The funeral procession wound through Boston's streets, led by the hearse carrying an empty casket. Victoria sat between Sophie and Olivia in the black limousine, a physical barrier between aunt and niece. The church steps were lined with reporters and photographers held back by velvet ropes. Robert Sullivan's death-wealthy tech CEO, killed in a tragic accident, had become front-page news. Victoria gripped Sophie's hand tightly as they ascended the steps, presenting the image of a unified family in mourning. Inside the church was filled to capacity. The scent of lilies, hundreds of them, hung heavily in the air. Sophie recognized faces from her father's company, from charity events, from the business world. In the front pew, Caroline Westfield, the likely interim CEO, dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Victoria guided Sophie to the front row reserved for family. As they settled into the hard wooden pew, Sophie scanned the crowd, wondering which attendees were actually Donovan's plainclothes officers. She spotted Donovan himself sitting midway down the left side, his expression appropriately solemn. The service began with organ music, Bach, her father's favorite. The pastor spoke of Robert's contributions to the community, his business acumen, his philanthropy. A business partner delivered a eulogy praising his innovation and leadership. Not one person mentioned what Robert valued most, his role as Sophie's father. When it was Victoria's turn to speak, she approached the pulpit with perfect composure. Her voice, when she began, carried just the right note of controlled grief. Robert Sullivan was the love of my life. She began, her gaze sweeping across the congregation. Though our time together was brief, he filled my days with joy and purpose. He was not only a brilliant businessman, but a devoted husband and father. Sophie watched Victoria's performance with cold clarity. Every pause, every catch in her voice, every modest gesture was calculated for maximum sympathy. The congregation watched rapt as the beautiful young widow paid tribute to her departed husband. Robert's greatest pride was his daughter Sophie. Victoria continued, turning to look directly at her. He spoke often of her intelligence, her courage, her kindness. His greatest regret, I know, was not having more time with her. Sophie held Victoria's gaze, keeping her face carefully blank, while her mind screamed at the hypocrisy. This woman had deliberately deprived her of her father, had planned to ship her off to boarding school, and now stood claiming to understand Robert's feelings about his daughter. I promise you, Robert, Victoria concluded, her voice breaking artfully, I will care for Sophie as my own. I will ensure she grows into the woman you would have wanted her to become. Your legacy lives on in her. As Victoria returned to the pew, the congregation murmured in appreciation of her moving words. She squeezed Sophie's hand, a gesture that appeared comforting to observers, but felt possessive and threatening to Sophie. The most difficult moment came when the congregation was invited to view the closed casket before it was taken to the cemetery. Sophie stood on shaky legs, knowing she was expected to say goodbye to a father who wasn't actually inside. Olivia accompanied her to the casket, an arm around her shoulders. You don't have to do this if it's too hard, she whispered. But Sophie knew she had to play her part completely. She placed her small hand on the polished wood and whispered words meant for the cameras she knew were recording words her father would later hear. I love you, Dad. I'm being brave like you taught me. I won't let you down. The tears that slid down her cheeks were real tears of tension, of fear, of the terrible burden of deception. Olivia guided her back to the pew where Victoria waited with a perfectly pressed handkerchief. After the service, the congregation gathered in the church hall for a reception. Sophie stayed close to Olivia, accepting condolences from an endless stream of adults who meant well but had no idea what to say to a child who had lost both parents in the span of 3 years. She's handling it remarkably well. Sophie overheard one of her father's board members tell Victoria, children are so resilient. She's in shock, I think. Victoria replied, her voice hushed with concern. The therapist says it might not hit her for days or weeks. I'm prepared for the breakdown when it comes. Sophie bit the inside of her cheek to keep from laughing bitterly. The only breakdown that would be happening was Victoria's when she discovered Robert was alive and she was headed to prison. Across the room, Sophie noticed a woman in a dark suit approaching Victoria. The woman was tall and serious-looking, with the air of someone with official business. This must be Donovan's fake investigator. Mrs. Sullivan. The woman extended her hand. I'm Diana Reeves from Atlantic Insurance. I'm handling your husband's policy claim. Do you have a moment? Victoria's smile flickered almost imperceptibly. Today, this is hardly the time. I apologize for the intrusion, Diana replied smoothly. It's just that some questions have arisen about the accident report that we need to clarify. Questions? Victoria's voice remained steady, but Sophie, watching carefully, saw her posture stiffen. What kind of questions? The damage to the brake line appears unusual. Our forensic team would like to do a more thorough examination. Victoria's hand tightened around her clutch purse. I was told it was mechanical failure, normal wear and tear. That was the preliminary assessment, Diana agreed. But in cases involving substantial claims, we conduct more detailed investigations. Standard procedure. Sophie moved closer, pretending to get a cookie from a nearby table while listening intently. Are you suggesting something improper? Victoria asked, her voice dropping to ensure privacy. Not at all, Mrs. Sullivan. We're simply being thorough. $5 million is a significant payout. Diana produced a business card. We'll be in touch to schedule a follow-up. Perhaps early next week. Victoria took the card with visibly trembling fingers. Of course, whatever you need. As Diana walked away, Sophie watched Victoria's perfect composure crack slightly. She glanced around the room, then excused herself quickly, heading for the ladies' room. Sophie followed at a distance, watching Victoria enter the bathroom. After waiting a few moments, she approached the door, pressing her ear against it. She could hear Victoria's urgent whispers. "They're investigating the brake line. No, an insurance investigator just approached me at the funeral. She said it looks unusual. I don't know how much they know. What if they find something we missed?" Sophie's heart raced. The plan was working. Victoria was rattled, making exactly the kind of panicked call Donovan had hoped for. "We need to accelerate the timeline," Victoria continued. "Get the money, liquidate the assets. Jason, listen to me. If they prove it wasn't an accident, I get nothing. Nothing. We need to move fast." Sophie backed away from the door as Victoria's voice approached. She darted around a corner, pressing herself against the wall. As Victoria emerged, her face once again composed into appropriate grief. In the church hall, Olivia was looking for her. "There you are, I was getting worried." "Sorry, I just needed a minute alone," Sophie explained. Olivia studied her with concern. "We should go. It's been a long day and the graveside service will be difficult." Sophie nodded, exhaustion washing over her. The strain of maintaining her facade was taking its toll. But she had witnessed something crucial, Victoria's first moment of genuine fear. The carefully constructed plan was beginning to unravel. The cemetery was situated on a gentle hill overlooking the city. A white tent had been erected over the gravesite, sheltering family members from the afternoon sun. The closed casket, still empty, rested on straps above the open grave. Sophie stood between Victoria and Olivia as the pastor delivered final prayers. The scene felt surreal. Mourners gathered around a grave that would contain nothing but an empty box. Sophie wondered how many other aspects of adult life were equally ceremonial, equally false. When the service concluded, people began to drift away. Victoria accepted final condolences while maintaining a protective arm around Sophie's shoulders. The performance was flawless, earning sympathetic glances from departing guests. "Mrs. Sullivan," a cemetery attendant approached. "There are some papers requiring your signature before we proceed with the interment." "Of course," Victoria squeezed Sophie's shoulder. "Wait here with Olivia, darling. I'll be right back." As soon as Victoria moved away, Sophie turned to her aunt. "Can I stay with you tonight? Please, I don't want to go back to the house yet." Olivia's expression softened with relief. "Of course you can. I was going to suggest it. Today has been overwhelming." Sophie nodded gratefully. She needed time away from Victoria, time to process what she had witnessed and to communicate with Donovan using the special phone. When Victoria returned, her lips thinned with displeasure at the news. "Sophie, I really think it's best if you come home with me. Routine is important in times of grief." "Just one more night at Olivia's," Sophie pleaded, allowing a childish whine to enter her voice, a calculated move to seem younger, less threatening. "Please, Aunt Olivia makes the special hot chocolate Dad liked." The mention of Robert seemed to sway Victoria, who was still maintaining her role as the caring stepmother. "Very well, one more night. But I expect you home tomorrow, Sophie. We need to establish our new normal." Our new normal. The phrase chilled Sophie to the bone. Victoria's new normal meant life as Robert Sullivan's wealthy widow, with his daughter as an unwanted appendage to be managed until she could be disposed of. Olivia's townhouse felt like a sanctuary after the emotional theater of the funeral. Sophie changed out of the black dress, immediately gratefully accepting the soft sweatpants and t-shirt Olivia offered instead. "Grilled cheese for dinner?" Olivia suggested. "Comfort food seems appropriate." Sophie nodded, sinking onto a kitchen stool while Olivia moved around the kitchen with practiced ease. This small domestic scene, her aunt making dinner, the smell of butter and toasting bread, felt like the only real thing in a world of elaborate lies. "Sophie," Olivia said, carefully buttering bread slices, "there's something I need to ask you." Sophie tensed. "What?" "Last night I couldn't sleep. I was looking through some of your dad's papers that I had at my house, financial records, insurance documents." Olivia kept her eyes on her task. "There were some strange transactions in the weeks before his death. Large sums moved between accounts. And his life insurance policy was increased to $5 million just 3 months ago." Sophie's mouth went dry. "Maybe that was just because he married Victoria." That's what I thought at first, Olivia agreed, laying cheese on the bread. But then I remembered how he called me the night before the accident, asking me to look after you if anything happened. It seemed prescient. The spatula scraped against the pan as Olivia flipped the sandwich. And today I overheard Victoria on the phone in the church bathroom. She sounded frightened, talking about the brake line being investigated. Sophie's heart raced. Olivia had been there too, listening just as she had been. Her aunt was piecing things together on her own. "What are you saying?" Sophie asked cautiously. Olivia placed the finished sandwich on a plate and turned to face her niece fully. "I'm saying that your father's death might not have been an accident, and I'm wondering if you've had the same thought." Sophie stared at her aunt, caught between her promise to keep the plan secret and the overwhelming desire to share the burden. Before she could decide how to respond, her special phone buzzed from inside her backpack. "Excuse me," she murmured, retrieving the device. The message was from Donovan. "Victoria leaving cemetery now. Heading to meet Jason at Harborview Hotel. Officers following. Stay with Olivia tonight." Sophie tucked the phone away, the relief flooding through her. The investigation was progressing. Her father was watching, protecting her from afar. "Who was that?" Olivia asked, setting the sandwich before her. "Just a friend from school," Sophie lied. "Sending condolences." Olivia didn't look convinced, but she didn't press further. "Eat your dinner. Then I think an early night is in order. We're both exhausted." Later, after a hot shower and tucked into the guest bedroom, Sophie finally allowed herself a moment of true emotion. Tears came, not the performative grief she had displayed at the funeral, but real tears of strain, fear, and longing for her father. The special phone buzzed again. Another message from Donovan. "Victoria and Jason planning to empty accounts tomorrow. Moving timetable up. Stay with Olivia. Will contact in morning." Sophie's fingers hovered over the keypad. She wanted to ask when she could see her father again, when this nightmare would end. Instead, she simply replied, "Understood." Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by dreams of empty caskets and Victoria's cold laughter. Sophie woke just after dawn, momentarily disoriented, before remembering where she was safe at Olivia's, at least for one more day. She slipped from bed and padded to the window, drawing back the curtains to reveal a gray morning clouds heavy with impending rain. Somewhere in the city, her father was watching, waiting for the moment to reclaim his life and bring Victoria to justice. "Just a little longer, Dad," Sophie whispered to the glass. "We're almost there." At the safe house, Robert Sullivan hadn't slept at all. He had watched his own funeral unfold through the eyes of Donovan's hidden cameras, witnessed the performance Victoria had put on for the mourners, seen his daughter's brave face as she placed her small hand on an empty casket. Now he sat reviewing footage of Victoria's meeting with Jason at the Harborview Hotel. The hidden cameras had captured everything: their embrace, their celebration, their detailed plans to access his accounts and disappear with his fortune. "We have enough," Donovan insisted, pointing to the damning footage. "Between this and her panicked call about the brake line investigation, we can make the arrest." Robert shook his head stubbornly. "It's still circumstantial. I want her to explicitly confess to the attempted murder." "That may never happen, Robert. Criminals like Victoria are careful. They communicate in coded language and implications rather than declarations." Robert stood pacing the small confines of the safe house living room. "One more day. Let the insurance investigation rattle her further. She's meeting with my attorney today about accessing accounts. By tomorrow, she'll be desperate enough to say something incriminating." Donovan sighed, recognizing the determination in the other man's eyes. "One more day, but then we move, confession or not. Your daughter has carried this burden long enough." Robert nodded, turning back to the monitors where a new day's surveillance was beginning. "One more day," he agreed. "Then I return from the dead." The rain that had threatened all morning began to fall as Sophie and Olivia shared a quiet breakfast. The special phone remained silent, no updates from Donovan yet. Victoria had called Olivia's home phone twice, each time insisting that Sophie return to the mansion today. "She's very persistent," Olivia remarked after the second call, "almost desperate to have you back." "She wants people to see her taking care of me," Sophie said, the truth slipping out before she could stop it. "It's all about appearances with Victoria." Olivia studied her niece with increasing suspicion. "You're very perceptive about her motivations." Before Sophie could respond, the doorbell rang. Olivia frowned, not expecting visitors, and went to answer. Sophie heard murmured voices. Then Olivia returned to the kitchen looking troubled. "It's Mr. Phillips," she said. "Your father's attorney. He says he needs to speak with you about the trust Robert established." Andrew Phillips was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetual look of mild concern. He had been Robert's attorney for over a decade, handling everything from business contracts to personal matters. "Sophie," he greeted her solemnly, "I'm so sorry for your loss. Your father was not just a client, but a friend." "Thank you." "Ooh," Sophie replied automatically, the response now practiced after dozens of similar condolences. "I need to discuss some aspects of your father's estate." Phillips continued, setting his briefcase on Olivia's coffee table. "Specifically, the trust he established for you." Olivia sat beside Sophie protectively. "I thought Victoria was handling all the estate matters." "As Robert's widow, she is the executor of his will," Phillips confirmed. "But Sophie's trust is separate, established after Rachel's death and modified 6 months ago." He withdrew several documents from his briefcase. "Robert was very specific about the terms. Sophie is the sole beneficiary of a trust currently valued at approximately $12 million. Sophie's eyes widened. She had no idea her father had set aside so much for her future. "The trust is to be managed by a designated trustee until Sophie turns 25, Phillips continued. "Robert named you Olivia as that trustee." Olivia looked startled. "Me, not Victoria." "No, in fact, the trust documents explicitly state that Victoria has no access to or control over these funds under any circumstances." Sophie felt a surge of love and gratitude for her father's foresight. Even before Victoria had revealed her true nature, he had taken steps to protect Sophie's future. "There's something else," Phillips said, his expression growing more troubled. "Mrs. Sullivan contacted me yesterday about accessing Robert's accounts immediately. She seemed unusually urgent about liquidating certain assets." "Did you give her access?" Olivia asked sharply. "Limited access, as is her right as his widow. But I explained that the bulk of the estate will take time to process." Phillips adjusted his glasses nervously. She was not pleased with that answer. "What do you mean?" Sophie asked. Phillips hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. She became quite insistent, said she had immediate plans requiring substantial capital. When I explained the legal timelines involved, she suggested finding another attorney who could expedite matters. Olivia and Sophie exchanged glances, both thinking the same thing Victoria was preparing to run. "One last matter," Phillips continued, producing another document. "In the event of Robert's death, he left instructions regarding Sophie's guardianship." Sophie leaned forward, heart racing. This she hadn't known about. While Mrs. Sullivan is Sophie's legal stepmother, Robert expressed a preference that Sophie live with you, Olivia, if that arrangement is amenable to all parties. "It is absolutely amenable to me," Olivia said immediately, "but I doubt Victoria will agree." "The courts generally honor the deceased's wishes in such matters," Phillips noted, "especially when the child's preference aligns with them." Sophie felt a glimmer of hope. Even after Victoria was arrested, this document would ensure she could stay with Olivia rather than enter the foster system while her father's resurrection was explained. "I haven't mentioned this to Mrs. Sullivan yet," Phillips admitted. "Given her current state of mind, I thought it best to speak with you first." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Sophie's special phone buzzed with a new message from Donovan. "Victoria on move, accessed accounts, purchased airline tickets to Cayman Islands for tomorrow. Time to end this. Bring Sophie to police headquarters at 3 p.m. today." Sophie's hands trembled as she read the message. It was happening. Today the charade would end. Her father would return from the dead, and Victoria would face justice for her crimes. "Sophie?" Olivia's voice broke through her thoughts. "Are you all right?" Sophie looked up at her aunt and Mr. Phillips, both watching her with concern. "Yes," she said, a genuine smile spreading across her face for the first time in days. "I think everything is going to be okay now." In a few hours, the truth would finally be revealed. Her father would be restored to her, and the nightmare of living with her father's would-be murderer would come to an end. Sophie thought of Victoria making her frantic plans to escape with Robert's money, unaware that her carefully constructed scheme was about to collapse spectacularly. The woman had underestimated a 9-year-old girl, dismissed her as just a child, no threat to us. It would be her final fatal mistake. The afternoon sky darkened as a storm gathered over Boston, matching the tension building in Sophie Sullivan's small chest. She sat in Olivia's car, watching raindrops race down the window as they drove toward Boston Police Headquarters. Each mile brought them closer to the moment that would end the elaborate deception, the moment her father would return from the dead. "Are you sure about this meeting with Detective Donovan?" Olivia asked, glancing at Sophie with concern. "You've barely had time to process the funeral." Sophie nodded, her eyes fixed on the approaching police building. "I'm sure Detective Donovan was Dad's friend. He said it was important." Olivia sighed, still confused by the urgency of the detective's request to meet with a grieving 9-year-old. "I just don't understand why this couldn't wait a few days." "You will," Sophie said softly. "Soon." The police headquarters loomed ahead, a sturdy brick building with American flags hanging limp in the rain. Olivia found parking and hurried Sophie inside, both of them huddled under a single umbrella. The reception area buzzed with the controlled chaos of law enforcement officers in uniform, detectives in suits, civilians waiting on hard plastic chairs. Detective Donovan appeared immediately, as if he'd been watching for their arrival. His normally stoic face showed subtle signs of strain, shadows under his eyes, tension at the corners of his mouth. He'd been awake for most of the past 72 hours, orchestrating the final stages of their plan. "Thank you for coming," he said, shaking Olivia's hand. "I appreciate your promptness." "Your message sounded urgent," Olivia replied, "though I still don't understand why you need to speak with Sophie now." Donovan's eyes flicked to Sophie, a silent question passing between them. She gave him an almost imperceptible nod. It was time. "Ms. Parker, if you'll both follow me," Donovan said, leading them down a corridor lined with office doors. "There's something you need to see." He guided them into a conference room where a television screen was mounted on the wall. Sophie felt her heartbeat accelerate. Was her father here already? Would he walk through that door any moment? "Please sit down," Donovan instructed, his tone gentle but serious. "What I'm about to show you will be shocking, but I ask that you watch the entire recording before asking questions." Olivia tensed instinctively, drawing Sophie closer to her side. "Detective, you're frightening me. What is this about?" "It's about Robert," Donovan said, simply pressing a button on a remote control. The screen flickered to life, showing footage from hidden cameras in the Sullivan mansion. Victoria paced the living room, phone pressed to her ear, her face twisted with an expression of cold calculation that Olivia had never seen before. "The funeral's over. We can move forward now," Victoria was saying. "I've accessed the main accounts. 3 million transferred to the Cayman account this morning. Yes, the flight is booked for tomorrow afternoon. Of course the girl is a problem, but she's staying with the sister for now. By the time they realize we're gone, we'll be untraceable." Olivia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "What is this? Who is she talking to?" "Keep watching," Donovan said quietly. On screen, Victoria laughed, a harsh, brittle sound entirely unlike her public persona. "The insurance investigator had me worried, but I checked with my contact at the police department. The case is already filed as an accident. No one's looking too closely at the brake line. Yes, it was perfect work, Jason. Clean cut, time to fail exactly when he hit the highway. Better than last time." Olivia's face drained of color. She turned to Donovan, then to Sophie, her eyes wide with horrified realization. She, she killed Robert. She sabotaged his car." "She tried to," Sophie said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "But she failed." Before Olivia could process this statement, the conference room door opened. Robert Sullivan stood in the doorway, very much alive, his eyes immediately finding his daughter. "Dad." Sophie's composure finally broke. She launched herself across the room, colliding with her father with enough force to make him step backward. His arms wrapped around her, lifting her off the ground in a fierce embrace. Olivia stared at her brother, her face ashen as if seeing a ghost. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. She gripped the table edge for support, her legs threatening to give way. "I'm sorry, Livy," Robert said over Sophie's shoulder. "We couldn't tell you. It wasn't safe." "You're alive," Olivia whispered, tears streaming down her face. "How the funeral? The accident?" "There was no accident," Donovan explained. "We staged it after discovering Victoria's plan to kill Robert." Sophie clung to her father, face buried against his neck, inhaling the familiar scent of his cologne. After days of pretending he was gone, the solid reality of him felt miraculous. "Sophie discovered it all," Robert said, pride evident in his voice as he set his daughter down, but kept an arm around her shoulders. "She overheard Victoria planning with her accomplice, Jason Miller. She warned me, insisted I check the car. The brake line had been cut, just as she said. Olivia sank into a chair, overwhelmed by these revelations. The brake line? At the funeral, I heard Victoria on the phone. She looked at Sophie with new understanding. You knew. All this time, you knew he was alive. Sophie nodded, regret clouding her features. I'm sorry we couldn't tell you, Aunt Olivia. Detective Donovan said the fewer people who knew, the safer Dad would be. We needed Victoria to believe she'd succeeded, Donovan added, to gather evidence of her crimes and her connection to Miller. They've done this before. Her previous husband died in a suspicious car accident 2 years ago. Olivia pressed her hand against her chest, her breathing rapid. I mourned you, she said to Robert, anger mixing with relief. I stood at your empty grave and mourned my brother. I know, Robert said quietly, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. But we had no choice. Victoria is dangerous, more dangerous than we initially realized. Donovan stepped forward. We've been monitoring Victoria since the funeral. She's accelerated her plans, transferring funds and booking flights out of the country. We believe she intends to disappear with the money as soon as tomorrow. Where is she now? Olivia asked. At the Sullivan residence, packing. She believes Sophie is still with you and will remain there until tomorrow. She's planning to call later with an excuse about why Sophie shouldn't return home yet. Robert knelt before his daughter, his hands on her shoulders. You've been incredibly brave, Sophie. Braver than anyone should ever have to be. But I need to ask one more thing of you. Sophie met his gaze steadily. You need me to go back to the house, to make her think everything is normal until you can arrest her. Robert glanced at Donovan, who nodded solemnly. We need her explicit confession to attempted murder. Right now we have evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and her plans to flee, but the murder charge requires more. No, Olivia interjected, standing. Absolutely not. You can't send Sophie back to that house with that woman. She's already been through enough. I can do it, Sophie insisted. I've been doing it for days. It's too dangerous, Olivia argued. If Victoria suspects anything, she'll be protected, Donovan assured them. We have officers surrounding the property. Every room is monitored. At the first sign of danger, we move in. Robert looked torn, the weight of his decision evident in the lines of his face. If there were any other way— There isn't, Sophie said with quiet certainty. Victoria doesn't see me as a threat. That's her mistake. Olivia shook her head in disbelief. She's 9 years old, Robert. 9. This isn't her responsibility. You're right, Robert acknowledged. It's mine. I brought Victoria into our lives. I was blind to what she really was. And now I'm asking my daughter to help clean up my mess. A tense silence filled the room, broken only by the distant sounds of the police station beyond the door. Finally, Sophie spoke. Mom always said if something feels wrong, it probably is, she said quietly. I knew Victoria was wrong from the beginning. I need to finish this. Olivia recognized the stubborn set of Sophie's jaw, the same expression Rachel had worn when her mind was made up, the same expression Robert got during difficult business negotiations. The Sullivan determination ran strong in this child. If Sophie goes back, Olivia said finally, I'm coming too. I'll say I'm dropping her off. Donovan considered this. That could work. It gives us a reason to have you nearby if we need to move quickly. The plan came together rapidly. Sophie would return to the mansion with Olivia, who would leave after ensuring Victoria had no immediate suspicions. Sophie would then engage Victoria in conversations, steering her toward topics that might elicit incriminating statements. Once they had the confession on tape, Donovan's team would move in. What about Jason Miller? Olivia asked. We're tracking him, Donovan replied. He's currently at the Harborview Hotel making preparations for their departure. We'll take them both down simultaneously. As they prepared to leave, Robert pulled Sophie aside for a private moment. He knelt again, bringing himself to her eye level. You don't have to do this, he said softly. Say the word and we find another way. Sophie's eyes, so like her mother's, held a wisdom beyond her years. Victoria underestimated me, Dad. Let's make sure she regrets it. Robert hugged her tightly, his eyes meeting Donovan's over her shoulder. The message was clear. If anything happened to his daughter, there would be hell to pay. The rain had intensified by the time Olivia's car pulled into the circular driveway of the Sullivan mansion. Water cascaded from the gutters, creating a curtain of silver around the house's imposing facade. Sophie felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather, as she waved at what had once been her home. Remember, Olivia said, squeezing her hand, I'm just a phone call away. Donovan's team is watching everything. You press that panic button the instant you feel threatened. Sophie nodded, checking that the special phone was secure in her pocket. I'll be okay. Victoria thinks I'm just a helpless child. You are a child, Olivia said fiercely. A remarkable one, but still a child who deserves protection. They hurried through the rain to the front door. Victoria answered almost immediately, her expression shifting from annoyance to practiced concern when she saw Sophie. There you are, she said warmly, ushering them inside. I was getting worried. The storm is getting worse. Sorry to bring her back so late, Olivia said stiffly. Sophie insisted on coming home. Victoria's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Of course she did. Home is where she belongs right now. Sophie observed how Victoria's gaze kept darting to the grandfather clock in the foyer, her fingers fidgeting with her wedding ring. She was anxious, impatient for Olivia to leave so she could continue her preparations. Would you like to stay for tea, Olivia? Victoria offered the invitation, clearly perfunctory. No, thank you. I have some of Robert's affairs to sort through. Olivia embraced Sophie tightly. Call me anytime, honey. I mean it. As the door closed behind Olivia, Sophie felt the atmosphere in the house shift. Victoria's shoulders relaxed slightly, her smile fading as she checked her watch. You should get ready for bed, Sophie. It's been a long day. I'm not tired yet, Sophie countered. Could we talk for a while about Dad? A flicker of irritation crossed Victoria's face before she smoothed it away. Of course, sweetheart. Let me just make a quick call first. Sophie watched as Victoria retreated to the kitchen phone, already in hand. She knew Donovan's team would be recording every word. Moving quietly, Sophie positioned herself near the kitchen door, listening. She's back earlier than expected, Victoria was saying in a hushed voice. No, it shouldn't change anything. She'll be asleep by midnight. Yes, I've packed the essentials. The transfer from the Swiss account cleared. I know. We'll be on that flight tomorrow, no matter what. Sophie backed away as Victoria concluded her call. She settled on the living room sofa, arranging her face into an expression of childlike sadness as Victoria returned. Sorry about that, Victoria said, sitting beside her. Just some details about your father's estate that needed attention. Is that why there are suitcases in your closet? Sophie asked innocently. Are you going somewhere? Victoria stiffened momentarily. Just preparing for a short trip. There are some business matters of your father's that need handling in person. Can I come with you? No, darling. You have school. I've arranged for you to stay with Mrs. Peterson while I'm gone. Just for a few days. Sophie nodded as if accepting this explanation, though she knew the few days would have turned into forever had Victoria succeeded. What will happen to Dad's company now? The board will appoint someone to take over, Victoria replied, relaxing as the conversation moved to safer topics. Your father built a strong leadership team. The company will continue. And what about his money? Does it all go to you now? Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Some of it. Your father left you a trust fund for when you're older. The rest helps support our lifestyle and his legacy. Sophie leaned forward slightly. The insurance money too. Dad told me once he had a big life insurance policy. That's not something you need to worry about, Victoria said dismissively. Adult matters. $5 million is a lot of money, Sophie persisted. That's what Dad said the policy was worth. Victoria's eyes narrowed fractionally. Your father discussed his life insurance with you. He said it was to take care of me if anything happened to him. Sophie met Victoria's gaze steadily. He didn't think anything would happen so soon, though. The tension in the room thickened. Victoria studied Sophie with new wariness, perhaps sensing something different in the child's demeanor. Sometimes accidents happen, Victoria said carefully. No one can predict these things. Was it really an accident? Sophie asked, her voice small but clear. Victoria went very still. What do you mean? I heard you on the phone the night before Dad died, Sophie said. You were talking about brake lines and insurance money. The color drained from Victoria's face. You must have misunderstood. I would never. I didn't misunderstand, Sophie continued, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. You were talking to Jason, planning how to kill my dad and take his money. Victoria stood abruptly, her pretense of grief and caring evaporating like morning mist. You're an imaginative child, Sophie. Grief can make people think they heard or saw things that never happened. I know what I heard, Sophie insisted, and I know about the flight to the Caymans tomorrow. You're planning to disappear with Dad's money. Victoria's expression hardened calculation replacing concern. You've been going through my things, invading my privacy. You killed my dad, Sophie said, rising to face her stepmother. You cut the brake line on his car so it would fail on the highway. Careful, Sophie, Victoria warned, her voice dropping dangerously. Accusations like that could get you in serious trouble. Why did you do it? Just for money? Did you ever care about him at all? Something in Victoria snapped. Her carefully constructed facade crumbled completely, revealing the cold, calculating woman beneath. Care about him? She laughed bitterly. Your father was a means to an end, a wealthy, trusting fool who saw what he wanted to see, a beautiful young wife to make him feel less alone after poor Rachel died. Sophie felt a chill at the casual cruelty in Victoria's voice. You never loved him. Love is for greeting cards and children's stories, Victoria sneered. Real life runs on money and power. Your father had both, and now I have them. Not yet, Sophie countered. The insurance company is investigating. They know the brake line was tampered with. Panic flashed across Victoria's face. What have you told them? Everything I heard, everything I know. Victoria advanced on Sophie, all pretense abandoned. You stupid child. Do you have any idea what you've done, what you're risking? Sophie stood her ground, though her heart hammered against her ribs. I'm not afraid of you. You should be. Victoria's voice was ice. Your father trusted me completely, never questioned why his first wife's medications sometimes made her worse instead of better. Never wondered why she declined so rapidly after I entered your lives. Sophie felt the blood drain from her face. What are you saying? Rachel was inconvenient, Victoria said coldly. Lingering too long, I simply accelerated the inevitable. Horror flooded through Sophie. This woman hadn't just tried to kill her father, she was claiming responsibility for her mother's death as well. The room seemed to tilt around her as the full magnitude of Victoria's evil became clear. You're lying, Sophie whispered. Mom was already sick when you met Dad. Sick, yes, but responding well to treatment. Victoria's smile was terrible to behold. Until certain medications got switched, small amounts of poison administered over weeks, untraceable especially when the patient is already terminal. Sophie felt sick, her legs trembling beneath her. You're a monster. I'm a survivor, Victoria corrected, and you, my dear stepdaughter, have become a liability I can no longer afford. She moved toward the drawer where Robert kept a spare set of car keys. Perhaps it's time for another tragic accident. The grief-stricken child, unable to cope with her father's death, takes his car for one last connection to him. Such a shame about the steep driveway and faulty brakes. Sophie backed away, reaching for the panic button in her pocket. But before she could press it, the front door burst open. Detective Donovan stood in the doorway, flanked by uniformed officers, his gun drawn. Victoria Sullivan, he announced, you are under arrest for the attempted murder of Robert Sullivan, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, and the suspected murder of Rachel Sullivan. Victoria's face contorted with rage and disbelief. This is absurd. You have no evidence. We have everything, Donovan replied calmly. Every conversation, every plan, every confession, including what you just told Sophie about her mother. As officers moved to handcuff her, Victoria's eyes locked on Sophie with pure hatred. You little bitch. You were recording me. Not just recording, came a voice from behind Donovan. Robert Sullivan stepped into the foyer, his expression hard as granite as he faced his would-be murderer. Watching, listening, learning exactly who you really are. Victoria's face went slack with shock. You're dead, she whispered. This isn't possible. Very much alive, Robert replied coldly, thanks to my daughter who saw through you when I couldn't. Victoria lunged towards Sophie with a shriek of rage, but the officers restrained her. You're lying, she screamed. I killed you. I watched you drive away in that car. The brakes were cut perfectly. Thank you for the confession, Donovan said, nodding to the officers to take her away. Add it to the recording. As Victoria was dragged toward the door, still screaming threats and denials, Sophie finally let go of the brave face she had maintained. She ran to her father, who swept her into his arms, holding her as if he would never let go again. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe now. We're both safe." Olivia rushed in behind the officers, immediately joining the embrace, her arms encircling both her brother and niece. The three of them stood locked together as Victoria's furious protests faded into the rainy night. "She said she killed Mom," Sophie sobbed against her father's chest. "She said she poisoned her medication." Robert's body went rigid. "What?" Donovan approached, his expression grave. "We heard. We'll investigate immediately. If there's any evidence to support her claim about Rachel's death, we'll find it." "Would she really say that if it wasn't true?" Olivia asked, her voice shaking. "To traumatize Sophie further." "Victoria is a malignant narcissist," Donovan replied. "She might say anything to inflict pain, but we'll investigate thoroughly. Rachel's medical records, tissue samples, if they exist. If Victoria had any role in her death, we'll prove it." Robert looked down at his daughter, still trembling in his arms. In trying to protect her from one horror, he had inadvertently exposed her to another, potentially even worse truth. The weight of his failure as a protector pressed down on him like a physical burden. "I'm so sorry, Sophie," he whispered, "for all of this, for not seeing Victoria for what she was, for asking you to carry this burden." "Mom helped me," Sophie said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "In my dream, she told me what to do. She told me you'd come back if we did it right." Robert exchanged glances with Olivia over Sophie's head. Whether the dream had been real guidance from beyond or Sophie's subconscious processing her suspicions didn't matter. The result was the same: they had exposed a killer and prevented her from claiming another victim. "Let's go home," Olivia suggested gently. "My place. None of us should stay here tonight." Robert nodded gratefully. This house held too many shadows now, too many betrayals. They would find a new home, build a new life free from Victoria's poisonous influence. As they walked out into the rain, Sophie paused at the threshold, looking back at the mansion that had once been her home. She thought of her mother, wondering if Rachel had somehow guided her through this nightmare, if she had somehow known what Victoria would become. "Goodbye, Mom," she whispered. "We did it. We're safe now." The days that followed brought a whirlwind of activity. Victoria and Jason Miller were formally charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud. The evidence against them was overwhelming: recorded confessions, financial transactions, phone records, and Jason's eventual decision to testify against Victoria in exchange for a reduced sentence. The investigation into Rachel's death proved more complicated. Medical records were subpoenaed, and the prosecutor ordered Rachel's body exhumed for toxicology tests. The results would take weeks, if not months, but preliminary findings suggested Victoria's boast may not have been empty. Traces of heavy metals had been detected in preserved tissue samples, not enough to raise alarms at the time of death in a cancer patient, but suspicious in retrospect. For Robert, the revelation that Victoria might have hastened Rachel's death was almost unbearable. The guilt of having brought that woman into their lives, of having missed the signs, threatened to consume him. Only Sophie's need for his strength kept him functioning through the darkest days. The media frenzy surrounding Robert Sullivan's resurrection was intense. Reporters camped outside Olivia's townhouse, desperate for the exclusive story of the tech CEO who had faked his own death to catch his murderous wife. Robert's company stock fluctuated wildly as the market processed the news of his return. Through it all, Sophie remained the calm center of the storm. She attended sessions with Dr. Elizabeth Mercer, a child psychologist specializing in trauma, who helped her process the events of the past weeks. She spoke openly about her fears, her guilt over deceiving Olivia, and her lingering questions about her mother's death. "You showed extraordinary courage," Dr. Mercer told her during one session, Robert sitting nearby. "But it's important to remember that you're still a child, Sophie. You don't have to be the strong one all the time." "I know," Sophie said, glancing at her father. "Dad and I are taking turns now." Robert smiled, though his eyes remained haunted by all that had happened. "Sophie is teaching me how to be brave again." A month after Victoria's arrest, Robert purchased a new home, a warm, modern house overlooking the harbor, far from the mansion, with its painful memories. He took a leave of absence from Sullivan Innovations, delegating day-to-day operations to his trusted executive team while he focused on rebuilding his family. On a crisp autumn morning, Robert and Sophie stood on their new deck, watching sailboats cut white paths across the blue harbor. Olivia was inside preparing brunch, the three of them having fallen into a comfortable routine of Sunday meals together. I was thinking, Robert set his arm around Sophie's shoulders, about taking some real time off. Maybe traveling for a while. Would you like that? Sophie considered the question seriously as she did all things. What about school? We could hire tutors, learn history by visiting actual historical places, study marine biology by seeing real oceans and their creatures. Like an adventure, Sophie said, warming to the idea. Exactly, an adventure for just the two of us. No deadlines, no board meetings, no expectations. Robert gazed out at the horizon. I've spent too many years chasing success at the expense of what really matters. Mom would like that idea, Sophie said confidently. She always wanted to travel more. Robert smiled, feeling Rachel's presence between them as he often did when Sophie spoke of her mother. She would indeed. The preliminary hearing for Victoria's case was scheduled for the following week. Both Robert and Sophie would testify about the events leading to the staged accident and Victoria's subsequent confession. Their attorneys had prepared them thoroughly, but the prospect of facing Victoria in court still sent a chill through Sophie. Are you nervous? Robert asked, sensing her thoughts. About seeing her again? Sophie nodded. A little, but I'm not afraid of her anymore. She can't hurt us now. No, she can't, Robert agreed. And after the hearing, we don't ever have to think about her again if we don't want to. What about what she said about Mom? Sophie asked the question that had hovered between them for weeks. Do you think it's true? Robert sighed heavily. I don't know, sweetheart. The medical examiner is still running tests. But whether it's true or not, we'll face it together. No more secrets between us. No more secrets, Sophie agreed solemnly. The sliding glass door opened, and Olivia stepped onto the deck. Brunch is ready, you two. French toast with that cinnamon syrup you like, Sophie. As they turned to go inside, Robert's phone rang. He checked the caller ID and frowned. It's Donovan. I should take this. Sophie and Olivia waited as Robert answered, their expressions growing concerned as his face paled during the conversation. When he asked, how is that possible? I see. Yes, keep me updated. Thank you for calling. He ended the call, his expression grim. What is it? Olivia demanded. Robert, what's happened? Victoria, he said, his voice tight. She escaped during a prisoner transport this morning. Somehow she had outside help. They're still investigating. Sophie felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She's free. But how? They don't know yet, Robert replied, automatically pulling Sophie closer, protective. But Donovan is sending officers here immediately. They'll guard the house until she's recaptured. Olivia sank into a deck chair, her face ashen. Will this nightmare ever end? She'll be caught, Robert said firmly. She can't have gone far. Every law enforcement agency in the state will be looking for her. But Sophie sensed the unspoken fear in her father's voice. Victoria had proven herself resourceful, ruthless, and unpredictable. Now she was free and undoubtedly seeking revenge against those who had exposed her. She'll come for us, won't she? Sophie asked quietly. She hates us for what we did. Robert knelt before his daughter, his hands gentle but firm on her shoulders. Listen to me, Sophie. Even if she tries, she won't succeed. I will never let her hurt you. Do you understand? Never. Sophie nodded, drawing strength from her father's determination. They had survived Victoria's plot once before. They would do so again if necessary. Within the hour, police vehicles surrounded the property. Officers established a perimeter, checking everyone who approached. Donovan arrived personally to brief them on the situation. We believe she had help from outside, he explained in the living room, keeping his voice steady for Sophie's benefit. A guard was found unconscious, his uniform missing. Somehow she had access to a vehicle waiting nearby. Jason Miller, Robert suggested. Donovan shook his head. Still in custody. We're looking at her other connections, previous associates, anyone she might have contacted during her brief time in jail. What should we do? Olivia asked. Should we leave town? Actually, we'd prefer you stay put under protection, Donovan replied. Moving makes you more vulnerable. Here we can control access, monitor approaches. Robert glanced at Sophie, who sat quietly absorbing every word. Whatever keeps Sophie safest. We'll have officers here around the clock, Donovan promised. Both visible and undercover. The property will be monitored by cameras. No one gets near any of you without being thoroughly checked. As Donovan outlined the security protocols, Sophie slipped away to her bedroom window, gazing out at the harbor, where boats continued their peaceful journeys, oblivious to the threat that had re-entered her life. She thought about Victoria, her cold eyes, her venomous words, her casual cruelty. Victoria had underestimated Sophie once before, dismissing her as just a child, no threat. That mistake had led to her downfall. If she came back seeking revenge, would she make the same error again? Sophie pressed her hand against the cool glass, watching her breath create a small circle of fog that quickly dissipated. She wasn't just a child anymore. She had faced evil and helped defeat it. She had protected her father when he couldn't protect himself. If Victoria returned, Sophie would be ready. The days that followed took on a strange rhythm. Normal routines conducted under the watchful eyes of police protection. Sophie returned to school with an officer posing as a teacher's aide in her classroom. Robert worked from home video conferencing with his executive team while police patrolled the property. Each night, Sophie checked the locks on her windows before bed, a ritual that provided more psychological than practical comfort. Each morning, she scanned the news for reports of Victoria's capture, but the fugitive remained at large. A week after the escape, Sophie woke to the sound of voices downstairs. Checking her bedside clock, 3:17 a.m., she slipped out of bed and moved quietly to her door, listening. Latest sighting in New Hampshire, a voice she recognized as Donovan's was saying, "Security camera at a gas station off I-9 mile. She's altered her appearance, cut her hair short, dyed it dark, but facial recognition software confirmed it's her." New Hampshire, Robert repeated. "She's heading north then." "Possibly," Donovan agreed. "Or it could be misdirection. Victoria's clever. She knows we'll track credit cards, cameras, traditional escape routes." "What's your gut telling you?" Robert asked. A pause. "That she's not done. That this isn't just about escape, it's about revenge." The way she looked at Sophie during the arrest, "I've seen that kind of hatred before. It doesn't just disappear." Sophie shivered despite the warm air flowing from the heating vents. She had seen that hatred too, had felt its intensity like a physical force when Victoria realized she had been betrayed. "We should leave the country," Robert was saying. "Take Sophie somewhere Victoria can't reach her." "You think she won't follow?" Donovan countered. "International borders mean little to someone with her resources and determination, and running means constantly looking over your shoulder." "So what do you suggest?" Robert demanded, frustration evident in his voice. "Wait for her to make an attempt on our lives?" "No," Donovan said firmly. "I suggest we bring her to us, on our terms." Sophie's breath caught. She pushed her door open wider, straining to hear more clearly. "What do you mean?" Robert asked. "A controlled encounter. We put out information suggesting Sophie has evidence we haven't disclosed yet, something that could connect Victoria to Rachel's death, something only Sophie knows." "Use my daughter as bait," Robert's voice rose dangerously. "Absolutely not." "Not actual bait," Donovan clarified. "Sophie would be completely protected, possibly not even present. But Victoria doesn't need to know that." "It's too dangerous," Robert insisted. "I won't risk Sophie like that again." Sophie stepped into the hallway, decision made. "I'll do it." Both men turned, startled by her appearance. Robert recovered first. "Sophie, go back to bed. This doesn't concern you." "Yes, it does," she countered, descending the stairs to join them in the living room. "Victoria will never stop hunting us, not until she's caught." "Sophie," Robert began. "I heard what Detective Donovan said," she continued, "about Victoria hating me most of all. That's because I saw through her when no one else did, and she knows it." Donovan studied her with reluctant admiration. "You're suggesting we use that to our advantage?" Sophie nodded. "She thinks I'm just a child. She's always underestimated me. Let her do it again." Robert moved to his daughter, kneeling to her level. "Sophie, listen to me. You've been brave beyond anything I could have imagined, but this isn't your responsibility. Let the police handle Victoria." "She poisoned Mom," Sophie said quietly. "The test came back yesterday, didn't they? That's why Detective Donovan is here in the middle of the night." The adults exchanged glances, confirming her suspicion. Robert's shoulders slumped slightly. "Yes," he admitted. "The toxicology reports showed elevated levels of arsenic in the preserved tissue samples, consistent with slow poisoning over several weeks." Sophie absorbed this confirmation of her worst fears, her expression solemn but composed. "Then I need to help catch her. For Mom." Robert looked at Donovan, a silent communication passing between them. The detective nodded almost imperceptibly. If, and I mean if we consider something like this, Robert said carefully, Sophie would need to be completely protected. Not just officers nearby, but a full tactical team. And she would need to be removed at the first sign of trouble. Of course, Donovan agreed. We would control every variable, every approach. Victoria would never get within 50 feet of Sophie. And I would be there, Robert added firmly. Not hidden away, not watching on cameras. Physically present. Dad, Sophie said, touching his arm gently, you're the one she tried to kill. You can't be visible. Robert started to protest, but Donovan intervened. Sophie's right. Your presence would immediately put Victoria on alert. She needs to believe Sophie is vulnerable, accessible. The discussion continued into the early morning hours, the plan taking shape despite Robert's ongoing reservations. By dawn, they had the outline of a strategy, a carefully controlled scenario, that would lure Victoria into the open while keeping Sophie secure. 3 days later, the local newspaper ran a small but noticeable article about Sophie Sullivan, providing new evidence to prosecutors regarding her mother's death. The article mentioned that Sophie would be attending a memorial service for Rachel at St. Thomas Episcopal Church, the same church where Robert's funeral had been held. The trap was set. Now they waited to see if Victoria would take the bait. The morning of the memorial service dawned clear and cold. Sophie stood before her bedroom mirror, adjusting the navy blue dress she had chosen for the occasion. Through her window, she could see police officers in plain clothes positioning themselves around the property, coordinating through discreet earpieces. Robert appeared in her doorway, his face tense with worry. It's not too late to cancel this, he said. We can find another way. Sophie shook her head, meeting his gaze in the mirror. She'll come, and when she does, this will all be over. The plan was precise. Sophie would attend the memorial service under heavy guard, though most of the officers would remain inconspicuous, blending with the congregation. After the service, she would visit her mother's grave, ostensibly to place flowers. That's when Victoria would most likely make her move in the relative openness of the cemetery away from the church crowds. But Sophie wouldn't actually be at risk. A young officer who resembled her would be wearing a wig styled like Sophie's hair, dressed identically. From a distance, the substitution would be convincing enough. Sophie herself would be in a secure location nearby, able to observe but completely protected. Detective Donovan says it's time, Robert had said softly. The cars are ready. Sophie turned from the mirror, her expression resolute. For Mom, she said. Robert nodded, his throat tight with emotion. For Rachel. Together they descended the stairs, ready to face whatever came. Victoria remained at large, a shadow threatening their future. But today they had a chance to bring her into the light, to end her reign of terror once and for all. As they stepped outside into the crisp morning air, Sophie looked up at the clear blue sky, thinking of her mother. Perhaps Rachel was watching over them, still guiding them toward justice, toward peace. We're ready, Sophie said, taking her father's hand. And they were, ready to close this dark chapter, ready to face the woman who had brought such pain into their lives, ready to reclaim their future from the shadow of betrayal. Together, the memorial service for Rachel Sullivan proceeded exactly as planned on that clear autumn morning. The church filled with genuine mourners, friends who had loved Rachel, colleagues who remembered her kindness, and family members still grieving her loss years later. Sophie remained safely hidden in an unmarked police van 2 blocks away, watching the proceedings through surveillance cameras, while her father and Donovan monitored from a separate location. The young officer wearing Sophie's dress and hairstyle played her part flawlessly, placing flowers at Rachel's grave after the service with convincing solemnity. She lingered just long enough, her movements deliberately slow and vulnerable, the perfect target for a predator driven by revenge. Victoria appeared exactly as Donovan had predicted. Disguised in a dark wig and sunglasses, she emerged from behind a large mausoleum 50 yards from Rachel's grave. The surveillance team tracked her methodical approach, her focus entirely on the girl she believed to be Sophie. In her hand, partially concealed by a bouquet of lilies, was a syringe. She's armed, Donovan's voice crackled through the communication system. Move on my signal. Robert, watching from the van with Sophie, gripped the edge of his seat. This ends now, he whispered. Victoria closed to within 20 feet of the decoy before Donovan gave the command. The cemetery erupted with coordinated movement as tactical officers emerged from hiding places behind headstones, from groundskeepers' sheds, from unmarked vehicles. Victoria realized the trap too late, spinning to run, only to find herself surrounded. Victoria Sullivan, Donovan announced through a megaphone, you are under arrest for escape and attempted murder. This time there would be no second chances. The syringe in Victoria's possession contained a lethal dose of the same poison found in Rachel's exhumed tissues, the final evidence that sealed her fate. In addition to her previous charges, Victoria now faced a first-degree murder indictment for Rachel's death and would spend the remainder of her life in a maximum security facility with no possibility of parole. 3 months later, as winter gave way to early spring, Sophie stood with her father at the bow of a small sailboat off the coast of New Zealand. Wind tousled her hair as she breathed in the salty air, pointing excitedly at dolphins playing in the distance. Behind them, Olivia adjusted the sail, calling instructions to Robert about the changing wind. Mom would have loved this, Sophie said, her voice strong and clear, no longer shadowed by fear or trauma. The intensive therapy sessions had helped her process everything she'd endured, allowing her to speak of her mother with joy rather than just loss. Robert nodded, watching his daughter's face illuminated by sunlight. She's with us in a way. In every brave choice you make, in every moment we cherish together. Their world tour was halfway complete, 6 months of adventures across continents, away from board meetings and stock prices, and the suffocating memories of Boston. They had another 6 months before decisions about returning would need to be made. For now, they simply lived each day fully healing together under new skies. Dad, Sophie turned to face him. I'm glad we didn't run from Victoria. I'm glad we stood our ground. Robert embraced his daughter, the most precious person in his world. Me too. You taught me that running from our fears only gives them power. You taught me how to be brave again. As the boat glided over turquoise waters toward the waiting horizon, the Sullivans, father, daughter, and aunt sailed forward together, no longer haunted by betrayal's shadow, but strengthened by the bonds that had survived its test.